Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my book surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels call Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," I said, "or madam, surely your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." And I whispered back, and an echo murmured back, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, something louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see what then thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a minute, and this mystery explore." 'Tis the wind and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the stern and grave decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the night's Plutonian shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast, upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on his placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Startled by the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hopes that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore. Thus I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl, whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease, reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he has sent thee respite and nepenthe from the memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
Considering how much crap people give this movie, it honestly isn't that bad. Mark said while taking another sip of his beer. His wife, Claire, took another fistful of popcorn from her bowl. Just you wait. This is one of my favorite parts coming up. In the next scene, a boy wearing a pumpkin mask watched a flashing jack-o'-lantern on a television while a silly theme played in the background. just as the mask began to rot and the kid fell to the ground. Claire heard the doorbell ring. She grunted with disappointment and set the bowl of popcorn down on the coffee table. Right when we were getting to one of the best scenes, she said with a slight hint of disappointment in her voice. Claire stood up from their couch and walked towards the front door. While doing so, she grabbed a bowl of candy from their kitchen counter as well as her witch hat. She placed the cheap cone on her head and made sure it was lopsided. As she walked down the foyer, she could hear her husband's laughter, bellowing as the sound of snakes and bugs. Squirming blared from the sound system. As soon as she opened her front door, she was greeted with the delightful, high-pitched screams of small children. Trick or treat. They all yelled in unison at an ear-piercing pitch. My oh my, aren't you a scary little bunch? Susan exclaimed while extending the bowl in front of them. She allowed each kid to take 2 pieces. Most of them immediately went for the good stuff like Snickers and Reese's. Just as she expected, none of the children went for the almond joys that had come in the variety bag. She didn't really mind, however. They were her favorite, and it meant more for her at the end of the night. Stay safe, children, and please be careful. This is a busy street, so watch out for any cars. Yes, ma'am, the group retorted while turning and running down the cobblestone path that snaked through her yard. One child covered in zombie makeup turned his head as he ran and yelled, "Thank you." Claire smiled and waved goodbye to the children as they ran down her driveway and onto the sidewalk. As she watched them take off towards the next house, she caught sight of her neighbor walking across the street. The two exchanged a friendly wave. The woman and her daughter glanced up and down the street before running across it and up to Claire's front door. "Happy Halloween, Margaret," Claire said while holding out the candy bowl for her daughter. "You know, I've been looking all up and down the street for you. I'm guessing Mark went out with Tommy tonight." Margaret's daughter, Elizabeth, shuffled through the candy in the bowl and attempted to find one that would satisfy her cravings. "Tommy actually went out with some friends from school. He was begging us all month to do it. I was a little skeptical, but Mark was the one that pointed out that we need to let him off the leash a little bit. We came to a compromise that he couldn't go past Jefferson Street." Elizabeth squealed with delight as she finally found a Twix bar among all the pieces of candy. She placed it in her bag and went back to scavenging through the bowl for another one. "We also put a tracker app on his phone just to make sure he listens. He's never really been a problem with this sort of thing, but I just wanted to be safe." They both looked down as Elizabeth made it known to the world that she had found 2 more Twix bars. "The 2 of us need to get going. If we see Tommy anywhere he's not supposed to be, I'll give you a call." The 2 women hugged, and Margaret took her daughter by the hand. As they walked down the driveway and onto the sidewalk, Claire looked on with a smile. The 2 of them passed in front of her house and further down the street. Just as Claire was stepping back inside, she caught sight of something in her neighbor's yard. A child stood near the edge of the grass. Claire guessed he was about 10 years old from his size. His small frame was covered in a pair of dark blue coveralls that were easily 2 sizes too big. His face was hidden by a Michael Myers mask that was meant to be worn by an adult, causing it to appear almost comedically large on the boy's head. An orange plastic bag filled with a small amount of candy hung by his side from a small fist. She assumed it was the Johnsons' kid considering he was standing in their yard. "Did you want some candy, Robert?" The boy stood completely silent and motionless. He simply continued to stare at her with the hollow, black eye holes of the mask. Claire had never really known Robert to be a talkative boy, so this hardly surprised her. Claire shrugged and shut the door behind her. She rested the bowl of candy back on the kitchen counter and plopped down into the cushions of the couch. Just as she found the perfect, comfortable position, Mark nudged her. "Would you mind grabbing me another beer?" She glared at him with an exhausted look. Just like many other times in the past, Mark flashed her a pitiful look. "Please?" he asked in a mocking child's voice. Claire grabbed the empty bottle from his hand and stood up from the couch. "God, you're insufferable," she said with a laugh. Claire walked into the kitchen and threw open the door to the refrigerator. As she grabbed one bottle, she figured that she might as well get one for herself. As she placed them on the counter and opened a drawer to retrieve the bottle opener, something caught her attention. Just outside the kitchen window, she saw a shadow fly across the grass in the soft glow of their security light. She leaned closer to the glass that had frosted around the edges. From the chill of the night air, a few dead leaves tumbled across the grass as she scanned the yard for the source of the movement. Ding dong. Her attention suddenly diverted to the front door. She left the bottles on the counter and grabbed the bowl of candy once more. As she flung open the front door, she was not greeted with the familiar cheers of small children like every other time that night. Her front doorstep was empty. She glanced at her driveway to find no one in sight. It was not until she looked near the edge of her lawn that something caught her attention. The boy in the Michael Myers mask was standing near the hedge that bordered Claire's yard. He stood completely still in the green glow of the Halloween lights that emitted from the front landscaping. At this point, Claire knew this was not the neighbor's kid. Although Robert rarely talked, she knew that he was not one to pull pranks like this. She attempted to see any details of his face through the holes in the mask, but to no avail. "Look, I don't know who you are, but either take some candy or get out of here." She held out the bowl in his direction. The boy tilted his head to one side. As the Halloween lights changed to a shade of purple, he then pivoted on his heels and walked down her lawn towards the street. He vanished around the hedge and out of her sight. "Little weirdo," Claire muttered to herself while opening an almond joy and popping it in her mouth. As she set the candy bowl back on the kitchen counter, Mark called to her from his perch in the living room. "Who were you yelling at?" "Just some kid who was standing in the yard. I saw him across the street in the Johnsons' yard a few minutes ago." "Well, did you offer him any candy?" "Yeah," Claire responded while popping the caps off their beer. "All he did was stare at me and walk off." "Good thing I'm here to protect you, honey." She rolled her eyes while walking back to the living room. "My ass," Claire said, shoving the beer bottle in his hand. She tousled his hair and sat down on the couch. With the popcorn bowl resting back in her lap, Claire picked up a handful and happily put it in her mouth. Scratch. She turned her head to find their dog standing at the back door, waiting to be let in. "Oh, come on." Giving up her seat once again, Claire dragged her feet to the back door and slid it open. The black lab pranced inside with delight and vanished into the kitchen to search for scraps. In its wake, a few leaves blew in through the door. Claire quickly rounded them up and tossed them back outside. As she looked out over the yard, she noticed the boy in the Michael Myers mask standing amongst the trees that backed up to the fence. "Hey, what the hell are you doing back there?" There was no response. "Mark, you better get over here." Her husband grunted as he stood from the couch and lumbered in her direction. Using the door frame for support, he leaned over and stuck his head outside. "I'll tell you one thing, that isn't the Johnsons' boy. Robert is a couple of inches shorter than that and a few pounds heavier." Claire blew air from her nostrils and pinched the bridge of her nose in frustration. "At this point, I don't care who the hell he is. I just want him out of here. If that means calling neighborhood security, then so be it." Mark stepped outside with his bare feet smacking on the flagstone patio. He stood right at the edge where it met the grass. His shadow loomed over the yard as he blocked some of the light coming from inside the house. "Either you leave, or we're calling security. You got that?" The boy stood motionless and refused to answer. "Are you deaf or something? Get out of here." This time the boy moved. He set the orange candy bag down in the pine straw and opened it. Reaching inside, the black handle of a kitchen knife emerged from the bag. The blade reflected the moonlight and bounced it back in their direction. "Holy shit." Mark immediately threw his beer bottle straight at the child. It hurtled through the air before shattering in large chunks against his head. His small body slumped and fell to the ground with a soft thud. "Mark, what the hell is wrong with you?" Claire cried as she ran through the doorway. "You saw that? The kid had a fucking knife. He might have a concussion now, thanks to you. Do you want to have assault charges brought on us by this kid's parents? I doubt they would do anything to us when they realized he was carrying a knife around. Just look at the size of that thing." Mark turned as he pointed in the boy's direction. To his shock, the child was gone. All that remained was the dark brown glass of his beer bottle scattered among the landscaping. "Where'd he go?" Mark asked while stumbling backwards towards the house. Claire took a few steps back herself and fumbled for the phone in her pocket. "That's it. I'm calling the cops." Mark followed her back inside and locked the door behind them. As the blue and white colors emitting from the television danced around the room, Claire dialed 911 and spoke with the dispatcher. Although difficult at times, she managed to keep the panic from seeping into her tone. "Tommy, hey Mom, I'm almost home. Is it okay if my friends come over in a few minutes and watch some movies? They had to go change because we slipped in mud." At this point, her son's messy clothes were the least of her concerns. "That's fine, dear. Just please hurry home." "All right. See you soon." he said with delight as the call ended with a beep. Claire shoved the phone back in her pocket and looked at her husband. Mark was staring out the kitchen window with his nose pressed against the glass. Any sign of the kid? Nothing yet, he said while turning towards the backyard. It's like he just disappeared into thin air. There was a knock at the door that caused both of them to jump. Claire breathed a sigh of relief and quickly walked towards the door. She threw it open and greeted her son with a sigh of relief as the cool night air flooded inside. I'm so glad you're home, Dash. The doorstep was empty, save for a few bugs that danced around the overhead light. Claire panicked and began frantically looking from side to side. Tommy, she called into the cool night air. Stepping forward, she was met with an unsettling crunch under her foot. She slowly looked down to find a piece of plastic cracked under her shoe. As she lifted her foot, she recognized it as the magical shield that had come with Tommy's costume. A knot formed in her stomach, and she began to lose her balance. Propping herself against the door frame, she called for her husband. Mark. He came barreling down the hallway in an instant. Is he out here again? Mark followed his wife's eyes down to the ground. When he saw the pieces of shattered plastic resting on the concrete, the color drained from his face. I'm grabbing my gun. Before Claire could stop him, her husband had fled to their room to retrieve the firearm from the top shelf of their closet. As she watched him disappear around a corner, she heard a noise come from the driveway. It sounded like something falling on the pavement. She timidly approached the driveway and peered around the back of her car. She was met with nothing but the sight of an empty sidewalk. She crept closer to the street and was surprised to feel her foot slip in something. She glanced down to find a small puddle of blood near the back tire of her SUV. Her shoe had smeared some of it across the driveway in a dark, crimson streak. Tommy's cell phone lay on the concrete with the screen cracked. Claire's contact was still pulled up on the phone app. Mark, she screamed at the top of her lungs. Within a matter of seconds, her husband came running through the front door with a pistol in his grasp. As he came closer to her, she pointed at the puddle, illuminated under the sickly yellow glow of the street light. Mark wrapped an arm tightly around his wife, pulled her away from it. He was met with resistance as she broke from his grasp and ran towards the street. As Claire glanced further down the sidewalk, she could see a trail of blood illuminated under the streetlights that dotted their way down the road. She felt her head spin and her knees begin to weaken. She soon fell to the ground and began to sob. Mark rushed to her side and bent down to cradle her. Tommy. She continued to scream her son's name into the cool night air, only to have it echo back as if the world was taunting her. As her cries carried up and down the street, hot tears ran down her cheeks. Mark held her tighter as the two were bathed in the red and blue glow of an approaching police car. The vehicle pulled up to the curb and the deputy threw his door open as he caught sight of them. As he approached, Claire's voice continued to pierce the night, only to be lost in the howling wind. In June 1972, a woman appeared in Cedars-Sinai Hospital in nothing but a white, blood-covered gown. Now this, in itself, should not be too surprising as people often have accidents nearby and come to the nearest hospital for medical attention. But there were two things that caused people who saw her to vomit and flee in terror. The first being that she wasn't exactly human. She resembled something close to a mannequin, but had the dexterity and fluidity of a normal human being. Her face was as flawless as a mannequin's, devoid of eyebrows and smeared in makeup. There was a kitten clamped in her jaws so unnaturally tight that no teeth could be seen, and the blood was still squirting out over her gown and onto the floor. She then pulled it out of her mouth, tossed it aside, and collapsed. From the moment she stepped through the entrance to when she was taken to a hospital room and cleaned up before being prepped for sedation, she was completely calm, expressionless, and motionless. The doctors thought it best to restrain her until the authorities could arrive, and she did not protest. They were unable to get any kind of response from her, and most staff members felt too uncomfortable to look directly at her for more than a few seconds. But the second the staff tried to sedate her, she fought back with extreme force. Two members of staff had to hold her down as her body rose up on the bed with that same blank expression. She turned her emotionless eyes towards the male doctor and did something unusual. She smiled. As she did, the female doctor screamed and let go out of shock. In the woman's mouth were not human teeth, but long, sharp spikes. too long for her mouth to close fully without causing any damage. The male doctor stared back at her for a moment before asking, "What in the hell are you?" She cracked her neck down to her shoulder to observe him, still smiling. There was a long pause. The security had been alerted and could be heard coming down the hallway. As he heard them approach, she darted forward, sinking her teeth into the front of his throat, ripping out his jugular and letting him fall to the floor, gasping for air as he choked on his own blood. She stood up and leaned over him, her face coming dangerously close to his as the life faded from his eyes. She leaned closer and whispered in his ear, "I am God." The doctor's eyes filled with fear as he watched her calmly walk away to greet the security men. His last ever sight would be watching her feast on them one by one. The female doctor who survived the incident named her the Expressionless. There was never a sighting of her again. Missing on Halloween, 1979. The disappearances happened during a birthday party at a McDonald's location in the small town of Dover, Tennessee. The police searched for several weeks, conducted interviews with their families and close relatives, and even took people into questioning. However, their results ultimately yielded inconclusive. After a couple months, the search ended and there was not much more they could do for the families that were affected. One would question why the police didn't look over the surveillance footage that the McDonald's restaurant surely had. But turns out, that location didn't have any such equipment. This was a small-town food establishment after all, and given the time period, many public places simply didn't have such luxuries back then. Despite this, the bodies were eventually found. The first was a young girl named Sarah, age 11, whom was found inside a sewage canal in a neighboring town. The police were only able to locate her body because a man had noticed her hand sticking out of the sewer opening. Her body was all cut up with lacerations, tearing large red streaks into her pale skin. In her pockets, the police were disturbed to find empty burger wrappers which were clearly from McDonald's. On her stomach were carved the words, "Happy birthday, Sarah." A few days later, another boy's body was found at the Dover football field. His name was Joshua, and he was 12 years old. He, too, was sliced up and had a McDonald's wrapper in his pocket. But his body had a message on it as well. Carved into his forehead was the word, "Eat." About a week later, the body of a 13-year-old girl was discovered by a family that was picking apples from a local orchard. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was found hanging from a tree. Her wrists were slit and her neck was broken. She was completely nude except for a crown and veil made from paper. The police assumed it was some kind of prom dress-up. In her hands was a toy ring, the type one would get from a Happy Meal. Written across her abdomen was the message, "Smile." A couple weeks after, a 15-year-old boy was found in the same apple orchard, hanging from a tree. The boy's name was William, and he was discovered with his legs missing. It was like someone had chopped them off at the thighs and then hung his torso upside down. He had no clothes on, but was wearing a clown mask that covered his face. Written across his back in black marker was the word, "Dance." 2 days later, the last child was discovered in an alleyway next to a grocery store. Her name was Jessica, and she was 14. She had a knife driven into the side of her head, and her arms were cut off. There were 2 McDonald's wrappers stuffed into her mouth. Across her body was the word, "Game." It is suspected that the children were all kidnapped by the same person. But the reason behind this and who was responsible for their murders remains a mystery.